Migration with another application and relationship timeline for a partner visa case that was recently granted, one that we handled here at Salvo Migration. I might just get straight into the actual timeline. So this one is an interesting one and a demonstration that applications sometimes will not always go smoothly and things may take longer than others. Okay, so this is also to demonstrate that these case files that we demonstrate aren't always intended to paint us in a perfect light. For example, this is a case that took 31 months to process with the Department of Home Affairs, all right, which is a lot longer than the other case files you might have seen, or the other processing time averages that you'll see in our approvals booklet. So there should be a link around this video. You can have a look at our approvals booklet. It has all our approvals there, and you can look at timeframes there. But this is an example of one that took a while. But I can give it context and explain why, and hopefully that may help you avoid something like this or a scenario like this where a case takes a while. However, there is a silver lining to a case taking longer that I'll explain in a minute. Okay, so this is a double grant. This is an 82801 granted to an applicant from the USA. So it's the permanent and temporary partner visa granted together, which effectively grants permanent residency to this partner visa applicant. The visa was applied for, I'll just move my very large head. The visa was applied for in July 2020 and granted in February 2023. Okay, so applied July 2020, request for information received in September 2021, which, look, back then was within normal ranges, normal timeframes. However, then things started to delay from there. There was a second request in October 2022, and then eventually, 5 months later, give or take, the visa was granted in February this year. So about a month ago at the time of recording this video. The reason that this case took longer than others is because of two factors. Firstly, it was that multiple requests for information were received, and that's something that I talk about in our Partner Visa Secrets modules regarding the tools that you have at your disposal to help reduce processing time. And one is to try to avoid requests for information by properly evidencing the relationship, organizing all necessary police clearances for both applicants and sponsors, and then organizing medicals for all applicants post-lodgement. That's, those are generally the tools that you have available, and continuing to update your relationship evidence as it's pending, as it's processing with the government. And those are the tools that you or we or any representative or agent or lawyer has available to reduce the probability of a request being received. However, sometimes that you will still get requests, and often it could be because of they have requested additional relationship evidence, which was the case with this application, which does delay the process, because basically they're saying, we haven't accepted what you've provided initially. We want to see more evidence that you were in fact in a de facto or spousal relationship when you applied for the visa and have continued to be. And that is what happened in this case. Didn't matter what we gave them initially, they still wanted more. Every now and then that's going to happen, and it provides an opportunity to give them more. But what will happen inevitably, kind of the flow-on effect, is that it will delay the decision, because then they need to wait for you to collate what's been requested, provide everything, and then they need to assess it. The second factor here as to why this case took longer was that it was actually assessed in Beijing. So this was an onshore application that was assessed overseas. Now that can happen from time to time. In our experience, it's for cases that they may deem higher risk than others. It's quite kind of well known or well established in the industry that onshore applications might be referred to overseas consulates and embassies for assessment. It could be to help alleviate potentially processing backlogs here with team members or case officers here, and they kind of reallocate overseas. They're still granting the same visa. It's just physically being looked at by someone in a different consulate. In our experience, those that are referred on typically relate to cases that maybe weren't as strong as others in terms of the relationship facts prior to application. So what I would say a high risk application. But even then, it is absolutely the minority of the times. This is one of the handful of times that we've seen this happen really within the last 12 or 24 months. But that was also a factor as to why it took a while, because whenever you're dealing with an offshore consulate, things take longer. They're just slower at kind of processing, kind of procedures are slower. It's impossible to communicate with them, and things just take longer. And those to me were the main kind of factors as to why this case specifically took 31 months, okay? But the silver lining to a case taking more than 24 months is that the door then is open ultimately for a case officer to, when they're ready to decide this, because it's taken 24 months since lodgement, the visa applicant qualifies for the double grant. Okay, that's one way to get the double grant, is if it takes 24 months or more to process. It's up to the discretion of the case officer to grant the double. It's not always going to be the case, but in this case it was. So in effect, the fact that it took longer might have been, at the end of the day, beneficial to this person, because there was no need for a subsequent application. No more documentation was required. The process has now been finished, finalized for them. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you have an application pending, if it's approaching the 24-month mark, you have the tools that I've talked about at your disposal to try to push it through, try to get it processed quicker. And that's just continue to update your relationship evidence, make sure the police clearances are up to date, and medicals are up to date, okay? But at the end of the day, if it takes more than 24 months, it may happen that when you finally get your approval, you'll get the double grant, and maybe it was all worth it at the end of the day. So that's the kind of context of this case. That's the processing timeline. In terms of the relationship itself, I'll see if I can find a space for my head. So keeping in mind, this application was lodged in July 2020. This couple had met in person in September 2016, so 3.5 years roughly. Point of lodgement is when they met. Started dating exclusively in November 2018, so lodgement, July 2020. Started dating exclusively November 2018. Introduced the family around a similar time. Obtained a joint lease in February 2019. So therefore, by the time they applied for their visa, really well over a year and a half-ish, they'd been living together. Engaged our services in June 2019. Couple then opened up joint accounts, organised wills, the civil union in June 2020, so just prior to lodgement, and nominated each other as beneficiaries to their superannuation beneficiaries after lodgement in terms of the dates there. So lodgement was in July, super was organised in 27th of July 2020. So at the time of application, effectively, the couple had met 46 months prior, were dating about 20 months prior, had been living together for 17 months prior, had been pulling their finances for at least 12 months, had a joint lease for around 17 months, nominated each other as beneficiaries to their super policies 20 days after lodgement. Okay, we would always encourage that to be done prior to lodgement, but in this case it was done after. Arranged wills about a month prior to lodgement, and the civil union about a month prior to lodgement. So there's some interesting kind of nuances to this case where they'd been together quite a considerable period of time, but some things were done quite quickly, quite in a short time frame prior to applying for the partner visa, which, sometimes I get the question is, Martin, does that look good or does that look bad? And, there isn't a definitive black or white, yes or no answer to that question. It really does depend on the full kind of history of the couple, whether or not we think that it might invite scrutiny. But generally, the rule of thumb, though, is it doesn't hurt to strengthen your facts as much as you can before you apply for an application. That's really generally the advice. But if you need case-specific advice or relationship-specific advice, and importantly, are interested in working with our team to handle your case like these guys, please feel free to book your obligation-free roadmap call. There'll be a link around this video to book a call with that team and have a conversation to see how we can help. But that pretty much wraps up this application timeline case study. As always, I hope these case study videos are helpful and beneficial to you and your partner. And I wish you all the very best on your partner visa journey. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.